Welcome to the Trackpaths Millie podcast, where history, leadership, and heroism come alive. Today's episode explores the invasion of Sicily, also known as Operation Husky. Jason's new book, Uncommon Valor, Medal of Honor Stories from the Battle of Iwo Jima, is now available in Kindle, paperback, and a collectible hardcover edition. It's the first in a 10-part series exploring the incredible stories of Medal of Honor recipients from World War II. Meticulously researched and vividly told, Uncommon Valor takes readers deep into the brutal battle for Iwo Jima, honoring the Marines whose acts of heroism changed history. From the chaos of the beach landings to the iconic flag raising atop Mount Suribachi, this book captures the grit, sacrifice, and spirit of America's highest military honor. To learn more or grab your copy, visit military-record.com. And please follow Jason on Amazon to be informed of future releases. Invasion of Sicily, Operation Husky. The invasion of Sicily, codenamed Operation Husky, represented a pivotal turning point in World War II, marking the Allies' bold entry into European territory and their first significant attempt to establish a major foothold in Axis-held Europe. Launched on the night of July 9th through 10th, 1943, this ambitious campaign combined massive amphibious assaults, airborne operations, and complex deception plans designed to mislead Axis commanders about the true invasion target. The Allied forces, commanded by General Dwight D. Eisenhower and comprising British and American units under Generals Bernard Montgomery and George S. Patton, sought not only to secure Sicily, but also to deliver a strategic blow to Axis morale and disrupt their critical Mediterranean supply lines. Operation Husky was a campaign of historic significance, setting off a chain of events that drastically altered the trajectory of the war. It prompted the swift collapse of Benito Mussolini's fascist regime, triggered political upheaval within Italy, and forced Germany into defensive actions that would prolong fighting on the Italian mainland. Strategically, Sicily served as a proving ground for new military tactics, teaching hard-won lessons in amphibious landings, airborne assaults, and combined arms coordination. Insights later applied effectively during the Normandy landings and other crucial battles. Despite fierce resistance, operational challenges, and missed opportunities to trap Axis forces, the invasion of Sicily remains a powerful example of strategic boldness and Allied determination during World War II. Strategic context and prelude to the invasion, the Allied powers understood the critical need to open a second front in Europe to alleviate the intense pressure on the Soviet Union, which had been shouldering the brunt of the Nazi offensive on the Eastern Front. By attacking through the Mediterranean, the Allies aimed to divert German resources, drawing their focus away from the fierce battles raging across the vast Russian steppes. This approach sought to capitalize on Germany's stretched logistical lines, forcing Adolf Hitler and his generals to make difficult choices about troop deployments and supply distributions. Strategically, the Mediterranean theater offered an opportunity to create further friction within the Axis alliance, potentially unraveling Italy's support for Germany. Securing the Mediterranean Sea was a primary operational objective for the Allies, as it would cut vital Axis supply routes linking Europe and North Africa. Control of these maritime supply lines was essential because Axis forces in North Africa relied heavily on steady shipments of troops, ammunition, fuel, and equipment from Europe. With the recent victory in North Africa, notably at El Alamein in Tunisia, the Allies now intended to consolidate their gains by taking Sicily. Doing so would transform the Mediterranean into a secure Allied supply corridor, facilitating future operations in southern Europe and maintaining strategic pressure on the Axis powers. Another pivotal goal of the invasion was to knock Italy out of the war entirely and depose its leader, Benito Mussolini. Mussolini's regime was already showing signs of political instability and military fatigue, as the Italian public grew increasingly disillusioned with continuous defeats and mounting casualties. Allied planners anticipated that a swift and decisive invasion of Sicily would trigger internal political turmoil, weakening Italy's resolve and hastening Mussolini's removal. Removing Italy as an Axis partner would isolate Germany further, depriving them of a key ally and complicating their strategic calculus in Europe. The Axis forces defending Sicily, however, were not completely unprepared. German and Italian troops had heavily fortified the island's extensive coastline with concrete bunkers, artillery emplacements, minefields, and beach obstacles, making any amphibious landing potentially costly. The Germans specifically positioned panzer divisions strategically inland, ready to deliver swift counterattacks and maneuver rapidly against invading forces. German commanders recognized Sicily's strategic value, and Field Marshal Albert Kesselring prepared for a rigorous mobile defense designed to bog down and exhaust attacking Allied forces. Despite these substantial defenses, cracks were evident among the Axis ranks. Italian forces stationed on Sicily were significantly undermined by poor equipment, limited supplies, and consistently low morale, exacerbated by years of defeats and lackluster leadership. This disparity between German professionalism and Italian readiness created vulnerabilities that Allied planners aimed to exploit. Nonetheless, Luftwaffe aircraft based nearby threatened to challenge Allied air superiority, ensuring that securing the skies would be an immediate and critical objective in the invasion's initial phases. To maximize their chances for success, the Allies assembled a formidable multinational force under the overall command of General Dwight D. Eisenhower. This invasion, codenamed Operation Husky, combined British and American troops in a well-coordinated assault, representing a complex and unprecedented level of inter-Allied cooperation. The British Eighth Army, famous for their victory at El Alamein and led by the methodical General Bernard Montgomery, prepared to land along Sicily's southeastern coast. Meanwhile, the newly formed United States Seventh Army, under the aggressive and determined General George S. Patton, was tasked with securing the island's western and southern regions. The invasion's complexity required extensive naval support, involving a massive fleet of warships and transport vessels from both the Royal Navy and the United States Navy. Amphibious warfare doctrine had significantly evolved since earlier operations, with planners emphasizing the critical importance of naval bombardment, accurate landing zones, and rapid movement ashore. The fleet would not only ferry thousands of troops safely to the beaches, but also provide critical fire support to neutralize enemy coastal defenses, ensuring the landings faced minimal immediate resistance. Lessons learned from previous amphibious operations greatly influenced these detailed preparations. One of the most innovative and intriguing aspects of the preparations for Operation Husky was the extensive use of deception. Operation Mincemeat became perhaps the most legendary intelligence ruse of the Second World War, showcasing a brilliantly orchestrated effort to mislead German strategists regarding the invasion's true location. A deceased body dressed as a British officer, complete with meticulously crafted fake documents hinting at invasions of Greece and Sardinia rather than Sicily, was deliberately planted where Axis forces could recover it. This remarkable act of espionage and subterfuge directly resulted in German commanders shifting troops away from Sicily, significantly weakening its defenses. The success of Operation Mincemeat highlighted the effectiveness of Allied intelligence operations, which consistently outmaneuvered Axis counterintelligence efforts throughout the war. German intelligence, convinced of the authenticity of the fake invasion plans, mistakenly redirected critical reinforcements to other regions in anticipation of invasions that would never materialize. As a result, when the real invasion occurred, Axis commanders in Sicily found themselves without the reserves necessary to effectively counter the Allied offensive. This masterstroke ensured that Allied forces could land with the element of surprise largely intact, greatly enhancing the prospects for victory. Overall, the strategic preparations leading up to the invasion of Sicily represented a sophisticated interplay of careful planning, bold strategic objectives, formidable coalition building, and cunning deception. Each element of the Allied approach, be it military, political, or psychological, was designed to exploit Axis vulnerabilities and maximize the potential for a swift and decisive outcome. Allied commanders recognized that Operation Husky represented more than just another battle. It was a critical step towards fundamentally reshaping the strategic landscape of the war in Europe. The amphibious landings, July 9th through 10th, 1943. In the pre-dawn darkness of July 9th and into July 10th, 1943, the skies over Sicily filled with hundreds of transport aircraft and gliders, launching one of the largest airborne operations to date. American paratroopers of the 82nd Airborne Division, alongside British airborne forces, jumped behind enemy lines to disrupt Axis communications, block reinforcements, and seize strategic positions. The plan called for precision drops near key towns and crossroads, vital for isolating enemy units. But Mother Nature had other ideas. High winds and navigational difficulties scattered airborne units widely, often landing troops far from their intended drop zones. This dispersion created chaos for both the Allied paratroopers and Axis defenders, generating confusion and unpredictability that unexpectedly benefited the Allied invasion. Soldiers who found themselves isolated or in small, fragmented units began improvising attacks, quickly securing bridges, crossroads, and defensive positions. Despite confusion and poor communication, their presence behind enemy lines successfully disrupted Axis movements and created doubt about Allied intentions. This uncertainty significantly delayed German and Italian counterattacks during the crucial early hours of the invasion. As dawn broke, amphibious forces surged toward the beaches of southern Sicily, initiating the main phase of Operation Husky. On the American sector, General George S. Patton's 7th Army made their initial landings near the Gulf of Gela, rapidly encountering pockets of resistance. At the same time, General Bernard Montgomery's British 8th Army landed further east near Syracuse and Pachino. Although Italian defenders initially offered only sporadic and disorganized resistance, the German units stationed on Sicily responded with characteristic ferocity, immediately mounting intense local counterattacks that slowed progress in some sectors. Despite these vigorous German reactions, Allied forces quickly secured their beachheads and began pushing inland, capturing vital coastal towns and port facilities within hours of landing. The Americans faced particularly tough fighting around Gela, where German armored units from the Hermann Göring Panzer Division mounted fierce assaults, aiming to drive them back into the sea. In contrast, British units rapidly secured Pachino and advanced toward the critical city of Syracuse, encountering relatively lighter resistance. This rapid initial progress underscored the meticulous preparation and rehearsals conducted prior to the invasion, which significantly reduced the confusion inherent to complex amphibious operations. Integral to the success of these initial landings was robust naval and air support, meticulously coordinated to soften Axis defenses and neutralize potential counterattacks. Allied battleships, cruisers, and destroyers bombarded enemy coastal positions, suppressing artillery batteries and disrupting Axis defensive plans. Simultaneously, hundreds of Allied aircraft from carriers and bases in North Africa conducted targeted strikes against Axis airfields, transportation hubs, and supply depots. German Luftwaffe units desperately attempted counterattacks, aiming to disrupt landing operations, but the Allies' overwhelming air superiority quickly neutralized this threat. With their foothold secured, the Allies began the critical work of expanding inland from the beaches. United States forces swiftly captured key airfields near Gela, setting the stage for immediate air support and logistical supply drops. Simultaneously, British units advanced northward toward the vital city of Catania, encountering increasingly stubborn German resistance as they moved inland. German commanders rapidly regrouped and began organizing determined counterattacks, hoping to halt or at least slow the Allied momentum before it became irreversible. As Allied units consolidated their gains, logistics teams efficiently established supply routes, ensuring continuous flows of ammunition, fuel, food, and reinforcements to sustain the drive inland. Axis counterattacks and Allied breakthrough. Shortly after the successful establishment of Allied beachheads, the Axis forces mounted intense and well-coordinated counterattacks aimed at pushing American troops back into the sea near Gela. German panzer divisions, including the elite Hermann Göring Division, spearheaded ferocious armored assaults supported by infantry, quickly turning the battlefield around Gela into a brutal, chaotic struggle. American infantrymen found themselves under heavy fire from enemy tanks and artillery, relying heavily on naval gunfire to blunt the armored thrusts. Allied naval ships positioned off the coast played a decisive role, directing their massive guns inland to halt or scatter the advancing enemy armor and infantry. The fighting around Gela grew particularly fierce, with both sides suffering substantial casualties in close-quarters battles marked by explosions, relentless machine gun fire, and artillery barrages. German tanks repeatedly probed American lines, exploiting temporary weaknesses and creating critical situations that required immediate reinforcements and courageous leadership at the platoon and company levels. Despite the intense pressure, American troops held their ground, exhibiting resilience and determination even under conditions of extreme stress and confusion. After several hours of fierce combat, the Allies stabilized their positions, successfully repelling the German attacks and preserving their critical foothold on Sicily. Following the intense defensive battles near Gela, General George S. Patton recognized an opportunity to exploit weakened Axis positions across western Sicily. With characteristic aggression and decisiveness, Patton ordered rapid armored advances aimed at capturing key strategic towns, such as Palermo and Agrigento. American tanks, mechanized infantry, and motorized columns swiftly maneuvered through gaps in Axis defenses, cutting off enemy units and rapidly securing large swaths of territory. This bold strategy dramatically outflanked the Axis defenses, causing confusion and disorganization within enemy ranks and isolating Italian units who lacked support and clear orders. As American forces surged forward, thousands of Italian soldiers, disillusioned and demoralized, surrendered without significant resistance. The collapse of morale among Italian units in western Sicily significantly reduced the overall Axis defensive capability in the area, allowing United States forces to achieve their objectives quickly and with minimal casualties. German resistance in the West remained sporadic and disjointed, as their limited resources and overstretched command structures were unable to mount effective responses to Patton's lightning advances. This rapid progress in the West contrasted sharply with the situation faced by British troops fighting further east. On Sicily's eastern front, British forces under General Bernard Montgomery encountered much stiffer resistance from seasoned German Fallschirmjäger, or paratroopers, entrenched around the strategically important city of Catania. These German units, well-disciplined and experienced in defensive operations, exploited the region's rugged terrain, using natural features like ravines and hillsides to create fortified defensive positions. Heavy artillery barrages and snipers hidden among ruins and natural cover inflicted continuous casualties and delayed British advances, creating costly bottlenecks and frustrating the meticulously planned British timetable for the drive northward. Montgomery's progress toward Messina slowed significantly, becoming a grinding, attritional campaign characterized by brutal, small-unit engagements. Recognizing the need for greater coordination, Allied commanders shifted their strategy toward a unified push to squeeze the remaining Axis forces into a confined area around Messina, located at the island's northeastern tip. American and British troops worked closely together, executing carefully coordinated attacks supported by relentless artillery barrages and devastating airstrikes against entrenched German positions. As the pressure increased, German commanders began a disciplined and methodical withdrawal across the Strait of Messina, evacuating troops, vehicles, and equipment to mainland Italy under the cover of darkness. The final battles on Sicily involved intense fighting as Allied forces sought to encircle and destroy remaining Axis remnants, facing stubborn resistance until the last moment of evacuation. German evacuation and Allied victory, August 1st through 17th, 1943. As Allied forces tightened their grip on Sicily, German commanders shifted their strategy from holding territory to conducting a carefully orchestrated rearguard action designed to buy time. Employing skilled delaying tactics, German units continuously slowed the Allied advance by sabotaging critical infrastructure blowing up bridges, roads, and rail lines. These actions significantly impeded the Allied pursuit, forcing engineers to laboriously rebuild routes while infantry and armor waited impatiently behind them. German defensive lines around Messina served as critical choke points, enabling their engineers to methodically destroy pathways behind withdrawing units, thus ensuring the evacuation proceeded without severe disruption. In contrast, Italian military cohesion continued to deteriorate, leaving German forces increasingly isolated in their defensive stance. Italian units, demoralized and poorly supplied, frequently surrendered en masse to advancing Allied soldiers, further complicating German plans. Without reliable Italian support, the Germans had to depend heavily on their disciplined troops to maintain effective resistance, carefully managing defensive withdrawals and protecting critical escape routes. Despite these challenges, German commanders maintained remarkable discipline and organization, successfully holding off larger Allied formations until their units were safely evacuated across the Strait of Messina. The evacuation from Sicily, executed under Operation Lehrgang, became one of Germany's most efficiently executed military withdrawals during World War II. Over a span of 2 weeks, German troops systematically retreated across the narrow Strait of Messina to the Italian mainland, meticulously evacuating more than 100,000 Axis soldiers, along with tanks, artillery, and essential equipment. The operation relied heavily on a fleet of landing craft, barges, and ferries working under the cover of darkness, continually ferrying personnel and materiel across the heavily patrolled waters. The German High Command, including Adolf Hitler himself, later viewed this well-coordinated withdrawal as a significant success, preserving experienced units and critical resources for future engagements on the Italian mainland. Allied commanders were acutely aware of the German efforts to evacuate their forces and aimed to disrupt this escape through relentless airstrikes and naval interdiction missions. However, despite the Allies' air superiority and extensive naval presence, their attempts to prevent the German evacuation ultimately fell short. Nighttime conditions, effective Axis anti-aircraft defenses, and German skill at camouflage and deception minimized Allied effectiveness, allowing the majority of Axis troops and their heavy equipment to reach Italy safely. This strategic failure frustrated Allied planners, who had hoped to destroy or capture the majority of German units before they could reinforce defensive positions on the Italian mainland. Finally, on August 17, 1943, Allied troops entered Messina, marking the official end of combat operations in Sicily. General George S. Patton's forces, famously driven by a personal and professional rivalry with General Montgomery, arrived first, securing bragging rights in the widely publicized race to Messina. The city fell with relatively little resistance as the remaining pockets of Axis forces, primarily Italians who had not evacuated, surrendered promptly upon realizing their untenable situation. This final push secured Sicily entirely under Allied control, providing a crucial staging area for further invasions into the European continent. The successful capture of Sicily, however, came at a heavy price in lives and material. Axis forces suffered approximately 29,000 killed or wounded during the campaign, with an additional 140,000 troops captured, most of whom were Italian soldiers who had surrendered willingly or were captured in large numbers following the collapse of their command structures. Allied forces also sustained significant casualties, totaling nearly 25,000 soldiers killed, wounded, or missing throughout the intense fighting that characterized the campaign. Civilian casualties were substantial as well, with many Sicilian towns severely damaged or destroyed by relentless bombardments, aerial strikes, and ground combat, leading to widespread suffering among the local population. Legacy and strategic impact of the Sicilian campaign. The fall of Sicily had immediate and dramatic political consequences within Italy, shaking the foundations of Benito Mussolini's fascist regime. The rapid Allied conquest exposed Italy's military vulnerabilities and triggered intense political turmoil in Rome. Facing widespread dissatisfaction and unrest, King Victor Emmanuel III, acting decisively, ordered Mussolini's arrest on July 25, 1943, marking the abrupt end of his dictatorial rule. This political upheaval paved the way for the establishment of a new Italian government under Marshal Pietro Badoglio, which quickly initiated secret negotiations with Allied leaders, seeking an armistice and an end to Italy's involvement in the war. However, Italy's internal collapse did not simplify the Allies' strategic challenges. Instead, it forced Germany into rapid military action to maintain its strategic position in southern Europe. Recognizing the threat of losing a key Axis partner, German forces swiftly occupied northern and central Italy, effectively transforming the country into another battlefield. This rapid German intervention not only prolonged the war in Italy, but also set the stage for some of the conflict's most grueling and costly engagements, as German commanders prepared defensive positions stretching from Rome northward, determined to delay and exhaust Allied advances for as long as possible. Operation Husky significantly influenced Allied thinking on amphibious and airborne operations, providing invaluable lessons that shaped future wartime strategies. This campaign marked the Allies' first major deployment of large-scale airborne forces, highlighting both their tactical potential and inherent operational difficulties. Coordination between naval, ground, and airborne units proved complex and challenging, leading commanders to rethink logistics, communication, and timing for subsequent missions. Lessons gleaned from the scattered airborne drops, complex amphibious landings, and supply challenges on Sicily profoundly informed later operations, most notably the Normandy invasion in June 1944. Among these critical lessons was the realization of how crucial secure supply lines were to sustaining momentum in a contested invasion. Rapid advances inland required a constant flow of ammunition, fuel, food, and reinforcements, demanding sophisticated logistical operations that could adapt swiftly to battlefield conditions. The Sicilian experience emphasized the importance of flexibility in planning and execution, enabling units to effectively adjust strategies and tactics when confronting unexpected resistance or operational setbacks. These insights ultimately refined Allied amphibious doctrine, leading directly to the more carefully coordinated, massive-scale landings at Normandy and in subsequent Pacific campaigns. The loss of Sicily also reshaped German military strategy in the Mediterranean theater, forcing the Wehrmacht to abandon any remaining ambitions of offensive operations in southern Europe. Instead, German planners committed fully to a defensive approach, entrenching their forces behind formidable fortifications across mainland Italy. Construction commenced on massive defensive works, such as the Gustav Line, and later the Gothic Line, transforming the Italian peninsula into a fortress-like defensive stronghold. German commanders embraced a strategy focused on strategic withdrawals, tactical delays, and continuous attrition against advancing Allied forces. Strategically, Operation Husky proved the effectiveness of combined arms warfare and strengthened inter-Allied cooperation between American and British forces. Both armies had to synchronize their different military traditions, logistics systems, and command styles, overcoming initial friction and building mutual trust that would prove critical for future joint operations. The Sicilian campaign also underscored the feasibility and potential effectiveness of opening additional fronts in Europe, clearly demonstrating to Allied planners that Axis forces could indeed be decisively defeated outside the brutal Eastern Front. These revelations encouraged the Allies to shift their strategic focus firmly onto the Italian mainland, resulting in the subsequent amphibious invasion at Salerno, known as Operation Avalanche, and shaping broader strategic discussions leading ultimately toward victory in Europe. Conclusion. The Sicilian campaign, culminating in the Allied capture of Messina on August 17, 1943, stands as one of the most significant operations of World War II, fundamentally reshaping the strategic landscape in Europe. By forcing Italy from the Axis coalition, the Allies not only weakened Germany's strategic position, but also demonstrated their capability to conduct complex and coordinated operations against fortified Axis territories. The meticulous planning, bold airborne and amphibious assaults, and adaptive responses to Axis counterattacks showcased a new level of combined arms warfare, setting critical precedents for subsequent operations in Italy, France, and beyond. Yet Operation Husky also highlighted the harsh realities of wartime complexities, including fierce German resistance, logistical challenges, and missed opportunities, such as the Axis evacuation across the Strait of Messina. Despite these setbacks, the successful invasion of Sicily undeniably shifted the momentum of the war, boosting Allied morale, refining their combat techniques, and paving the way for more ambitious campaigns across mainland Europe. Ultimately, the Sicilian campaign exemplifies the profound impact of strategic initiative, inter-allied cooperation, and tactical flexibility in achieving victory during one of history's most challenging conflicts. Thank you for joining me on today's episode of the Trackpads Military Podcast. If you would like to dive deeper into more stories of bravery, leadership, and history, visit trackpads.com. Until next time, keep exploring, stay inspired, and remember, the lessons of the past shape the warriors of the future.